What's up?
Is that your observer?
My what? Yes, that is my advisor. KU. How are we doing today?
Good.
Great.
How are you?
I have no complaints. It's Friday, so
Do you have any exciting plans for the weekend?
exciting plans for the week. I'm gonna sleep. I'm gonna be doing a lot of that. I'm kind of on a deficit right now. Let's see. After that, I don't know. I have a close friend of mine from high school. We're one of these weekends. We're not gonna do it this weekend, but we're gonna take a drive. We used to do this all the time in high school, where we would drive and then we would get to like a fork in the road and then have like a heads or tails on whether or not we're gonna go left or right. And so we ended up ending up in a town called Peabody when we did that last time, and we found an antique store and found all kinds of cool things there. An old breakfast place too. It was like one of those places that was like heavy smokers went to for like 40 years. You know, you can't smoke in there anymore, but you can still smell that in the place. Best breakfast food I've ever had. Like, it's yeah, not even close. If everyone who had a chance, I think I talked about this on Tuesday, I think. Whoever had a chance to download Nearpod, if you have your phones with you today, I want to see them. So if you can get Nearpod out right now. Also, if you want to welcome Tina Ellsworth, she is my advisor from KU. Today she is observing me, so also have the camera on in the back too. So this is, yeah. No, thank you for being part of this class today, showing up and sharing this space with me today. This is the first time I've ever been advised or observed at this level. So with that said, who here, we have any luck with everyone ready on Nearpod? Okay, so once you have the session pin up, if you can enter that pin right there. Apologies in advance for my handwriting. If you have any questions on what the letters are, just let me know. Yes. It's okay. You don't need the app. You can still follow along with notes, you know, there are going to be a lot of hands-on activities, different articles you're going to look through in this hour. So not the end of the world if you don't have the application. Okay. So today we're looking over the Keystone Pipeline and debate over the Keystone Pipeline. Does anyone know about this debate? Anyone know? All right, that's fine. So some background here. Congress passed the Keystone Pipeline in early 2015. The President vetoed this legislation on February 2015. And so what we're going to do in class today is that, I don't know if you know this or not, but in this classroom, I was just elected or just appointed as Obama's Chief of Staff. And today we are having a cabinet meeting where you are going to recommend whether or not Obama should veto this legislation again. So through this class, through today's activity, I'm just giving you an idea of what you're doing. So you all have a quiz on Monday. I think you had the study guides passed out to you on Thursday. So there's going to be a focus on the executive branch, over the legislative executive branch, as well as federalism is on there too. If you recall the video you watched with Brian Williams, you saw how important Obama's cabinet was, how the amount of meetings that he has per day on issues like this. So you're going to be taking part in a real world debate that's surrounding the executive cabinet, and also you're going to see the role that a president's cabinet can play in advising the president, and also we're going to see how the executive branch can actively check the actions of the legislative branch. For the purposes of your quiz, I tried to put, there are going to be questions on the quiz that surround each of these points. So in this hands-on activity today, my hope is that you leave with a better understanding of the daily functions and the day-to-day roles of the executive cabinet. So with that said, we're going to first go over background information on the Keystone Pipeline from it's a news report that was conducted by Time magazine.
Today I'm directing my administration to cut through the red tape, break through the bureaucratic hurdles, and make this project a priority.
The decision on whether or not to actually build the proposed Keystone Pipeline is one of the most important economic and environmental choices President Obama faces during the first few months of his second term. Here's what you need to know. The Keystone Pipeline is a proposed project that would take processed oil from Canada's oil sands in Western Canada and Alberta and pipe it down to the Gulf Coast in the U.S. By building the pipeline, you would enable the U.S. to greatly increase the amount of that oil sands crude it would bring into the United States. It would boost North American oil production, probably lower the price of oil as well. There are three main reasons really why environmentalists are very much opposed to this project. One is the potential for a spill you'll have with a pipeline of any sort, especially one that, in this case, would be carrying very heavy, unconventional oil that can do more damage to the local land if there is actually a spill. But the much bigger issue really is what this means for the development of the oil sands in Canada. Oil is much more carbon intensive than conventional crude. That means the whole process of actually getting it out of the ground, processing it, burning it, releases a lot more carbon than the equivalent amount of oil from Saudi Arabia, from Texas, for instance. And then third, the actual process locally in Canada of the oil sands can produce a lot of pollution, and there are concerns about water pollution for downstream Native Canadian populations. And so environmentalists worry that if you build a pipeline like this, you're essentially hooking the United States on this unconventional crude oil sands, and therefore you're encouraging Canada to continue developing them. State Department, which has jurisdiction over this project because it does cross international borders between the U.S. and Canada, is still looking at the project, still coming up with its report. We expect that to be sometime in the spring, maybe March. They'll actually come forward with it, and then of course it'll be up to the president to really say yes or no for this one.
Okay. So this debate wasn't something, just to kind of give you an idea of the structure of what the pipeline is going to look like. So on Nearpod, okay, so this is what the proposed pipeline is going to look like if the pipeline is constructed, if the Keystone Pipeline is constructed. It spans over, it originates in the Alberta region of Canada, and it will go all the way down to the state of Texas. Now, this isn't unique. This isn't like the first time we've done anything like this. In fact, these are the current pipelines that are already in place in the United States. There are a ton of them, and they all, and many of them already do originate from Canada. In fact, in 2009, Obama signed an executive order. Who here, can anyone tell me what an executive order is? All right, you have phones in front of you. Just look that up. Yeah, let's.
Isn't it like essentially it gives the president the power to like? It's kind of like passing a law, but it doesn't really like require. Yeah.
That's it. So the president can sign an executive order, but the funding from the order, if he makes something, puts something into law, the funding has to already be allocated by the legislative branch, or it has to be a law that can be put into place without funding. So when he signed this executive order in 2009, it was for the Alberta pipeline, and the funding had been already allocated by Congress. But interestingly, when he did this, there wasn't a lot of controversy about it. You know, the environmental debate hadn't really started about it, and it passed. You know, he released a report on the issue and everything once he signed the executive order, and it wasn't the debate that the Keystone Pipeline is today. And this is really one of the biggest debates of his last 2 years of his presidency. In fact, if you remember, when the president came to Lawrence, this here is on 15th in Iowa. I actually live at Meadowbrook, and I walked to watch the president give his address. This was actually a pretty significant protest all throughout Lawrence, and that's because the pipeline itself, a large part of the pipeline is going to be going through the state of Kansas. Not that far away, actually, from the city of Lawrence. And one of the risks, one of the worries that environmentalists have is that after the last pipelines got installed, after the Alberta pipeline got installed, something that we're starting to see is that these seals on the pipeline aren't always secure. The argument is that the standards aren't actually the greatest in the construction of these pipelines. This is an example right here. This is a pipeline that actually ruptured in the state of Arkansas and got into the water supply, got into a river in the state of Arkansas, and then ended up doing tens of thousands of dollars of damage in private property as well as public property as well. It was oil spills like this and different sort of environmental issues like this, which got the environmentalists involved after Obama signed his executive order in 2009. This is when you started seeing people mobilize, protests arise all over the place. You've seen this, the state of Kansas. We saw this during Obama's address, during Obama's addresses in the state, like at KU. And you've also seen a lot of activity like this in other states where the pipeline is passing through. And so, one of the biggest worries, though, especially in the state of Nebraska as well as the state of Kansas, is that the pipeline is going to be crossing over the Ogallala Aquifer. Anyone, we know what the Ogallala Aquifer is in here?
Yes, that is the aquifer that feeds almost all of the farming in southwestern.
Yeah, southwestern Kansas, North Texas too. It's huge. It extends all the way up through the Great Plains, and it's the water that we rely on for farming. It's the water that we rely on for almost, yeah.
Okay, how come like on the map that you showed it looked like there are pipelines already coming out of there? Why would they build a whole new one instead of just extending one of the ones that's already there over into Texas?
That's a great question. They're already at max capacity in the other pipelines. And so currently, right now, when they're exporting more oil from Canada, they've had to go by train. We're actually going to find that out. We're going to watch a few other videos on this issue. They've had to use trains. They've had to use commercial trucking. The other pipelines can't be extended any further. But that's a great question. And actually, the Alberta pipeline that he signed the executive order for was actually an extension of a previous pipeline, which is one of the reasons why he only needed an executive order and it didn't have to go through both houses of Congress. Great question, Thor. While we've seen the dangers here, it's clear that the Canadian government has taken almost a 180 stance on this. The Canadian government is completely in affirmation of the pipeline, and many people in Congress, in fact the majority of American citizens, are also in affirmation of the pipeline, and we're going to find out what their arguments are right here.
Very doer, and it's very good to have you on the show this morning. You guys, like you say, on the big issues, wow, doing incredible things, including the comments of your Prime Minister about to Putin himself. I like that a lot.
That's right.
I like that a lot.
On the big issues, we're getting on very, very
Now
well.
let's talk about
We've been
the
allied
pipeline.
ever since the War of 1812, so we're very proud of our Prime Minister's comments and the strong stand the President had on Ukraine, and we obviously are working together on ISIL, we're working together on Al-Qaeda, and we're working together.
This doggone pipeline.
Going from 75 to 76 pipelines seems to be hitting a speed bump.
From 75 to 76 pipelines, we had some guests on before that said, well, maybe if we block this, maybe they won't pull that oil out of the ground.
Yeah, they've been saying that for 6 years. So the last time I was on your show, we talked about it would move on rail if it wasn't approved on a pipeline. The first 3 months after that show, 200,000 barrels a day from Canada to the United States. Part of it's coming down on expanded pipelines, and I would bet, we haven't got the numbers yet, that half of it's coming down on rail. So the question isn't, and I listened to the show earlier, the question isn't climate change or energy or this or that. It's what kind of infrastructure do you want to have in both Canada and the United States to move the oil? Do you want it on rail from North Dakota and Montana and Canada, or do you want it on a pipeline?
Well, and the State Department study that you brought up last time you were on the show, we were just excerpting a piece of it that says something like 42%. The environmental impact is 42% less, according to Barack Obama's State Department, by pipeline instead of by rail.
That's right. If he says no to the pipeline, he's saying yes to higher emissions. The State Department also
Says his State Department.
his scientists.
Right.
And of course, the president signed a memorandum in 2009 saying that science would dictate the decisions of the government and the administration, not ideology. So we take him at his word, and we want the science to dictate this decision. I would also add that after, again, being on the show 3 months ago, there was a new report that came out from the State Department on safety, which increased the number of potential deaths if the pipeline was not approved, comparing rail and pipeline. So the issue of safety is never part of this debate. If you're the president or the Secretary of State, and you get option A is this number of deaths in injury, and option B is much less than that, 0, you always would go, I would think, with the safest
So
option.
on, the science is this, 11 studies, Michael, still, the science is very clear. On emissions, the pipeline actually is more environmentally friendly. On safety, the pipeline is safer. That's science. I'm confused as to why the president's not
Well,
following
this is
science.
where the politics confuses the science, or the science clearly is not being considered in the politics. And I think the president has his own particular view on this thing, that he wants to stay or keep close to where his base is on this issue for political reasons. Which leads me to ask the question, how do you, Mr. Ambassador, answer the president's charge this week that, well, this is just a pipeline coming through our country, we get no benefit from this, so why would we do this? We don't, it's only gonna create 50 jobs, it's going to, put us in an adverse position on the environment. What's the American benefit, from the Canadians' perspective, in building this pipeline, since it's just piping right through
I was
Canada?
surprised to hear that Montana and North Dakota were added to Canada when it was said all the oil would come from Canada. I think a number of senators are both Democrat and Republican were surprised to hear that, because about 15% of the oil is American oil from the Bakken field to the Gulf Coast of Mexico. So notwithstanding that, it's both Canadian and American oil proposed to go on the pipeline. It's now going on rail as the pipeline is delayed, and it's going to U.S. refineries, U.S. steel workers working in Valero and other refineries on the Gulf Coast. And of course, the construction jobs are documented in the State Department report, 44,000. But we have a supply chain across our two countries. There's 68 companies in Illinois that supply Caterpillar tractors to places like the oil sands. It's one supply chain, unlike other countries that don't have
And I
that.
think, Sam, as you brought up, didn't you, the AFL-CIO supports this, so there must be.
Well, how many of those 44,000 jobs are there after 2 years?
Okay, the supply chain has got 1,200 companies that are in the United States that are supplying energy efficiency equipment. General Electric is supplying also. Pardon?
How many jobs remain after 2 years?
On a pipeline, the State Department has documented 44,000 building it, 35 jobs operating it, but it's also documented that thousands of jobs. Back to your original point earlier.
Okay, so what we've seen, the stance that the Canadian government is taking here, and this is something actually that was a great question by Thor earlier that kind of pointed to this, is that if this pipeline isn't constructed, we're still going to get the oil into the United States because we need oil to survive. It's just sort of a reality of our contemporary society. And so what the Canadian government is saying is that if this pipeline isn't constructed, we're going to have to use more dangerous methods. We're going to have to rely on the oil coming through train, which there are train derailments. Train derailments happen fairly often. These are things, that, and when in comparison to the amount of times that, what they argue is that it's more likely for a train to derail or a truck that might be carrying oil to get into an accident than it would be for the pipeline to spill. So they're saying overall, the pipeline is actually going to be much safer to construct for the United States than it would be if we keep relying on our current system. Currently, all the other pipelines that are in place are on max capacity. They can't add any more. There's no construction that can continue to add to the existing pipelines. They need a new pipeline in order to function. And so that's what is basically led into this debate, because for a long time I think they were relying on expanding existing pipelines so that they could. I think it was a way, one, they could avoid this debate, and two, they didn't have the demand for exporting this amount of oil to the United States before. But now, since the demand is there, they're arguing that this would be the safest way to satisfy the demand of the United States. So on that note, now we're going to watch someone who's the completely different side of the debate, the other side of this debate that we have seen on the Keystone Pipeline. and then examine what the arguments are, how the arguments can conflict with each other, and also if there are any contradictions in the arguments that we're seeing from the left and the right on this issue.
Senator, great to have you with us tonight. A colleague of yours on the other side in the Senate, John Hoeven from North Dakota, where all the oil is being pumped out of the ground, said that there will be over 60 supporters for a standalone piece of legislation on Keystone, and that's going to be one of their first orders of business in the Senate. How can Democrats fight this, and what's your reaction to that news?
Well, I think if you listen to what the scientific community is saying overwhelmingly, is that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, it is already causing devastating problems. So my response to Senator Hoeven is, listen to the scientific community. We have got to, as a nation, lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy. Frankly, we will look like fools throughout the entire global economy if we are advocating more and more dirty oil at the same time as we're talking about the need to combat global warming. So we have got to defeat this Keystone Pipeline. We've got to rally the American people to do it, and we've got to get President Obama to be strong on this issue.
Well, speaking of the president, he was asked about it yesterday after Mitch McConnell's press conference. Here's what he had to say about Keystone XL at his press conference.
Our energy sector is booming, and I'm happy to engage Republicans with additional ideas for how we can enhance that. And so Keystone I just consider as one small aspect of a broader trend that's really positive for the American people.
He gave a much lengthier answer than that. That's just a snippet of it. But your reaction to his position, the way it sounds right now, Senator?
Look, my reaction is pretty simple. When people tell you that Keystone is a jobs program, they're not telling you the truth. According to the State Department, it will create about 2,000 jobs, construction jobs, over a 2-year period, and then about 50 permanent jobs. If you want a jobs program, let's rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, invest $1 trillion in doing that, and create 13 million jobs, not 2,000 jobs. So I think the to our energy crisis is respect what the scientists are saying, transform our energy system, start putting billions into energy efficiency and into weatherization, and move aggressively in wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass.
Are you confident, Senator, that the Democrats can turn the tide on Keystone? I mean, they are bound and determined to have this built. It is Canadian oil. It's toxic. It has to be refined in a special refinery. It's not going to bring our gas prices down. It's going to be thrown out on the world market. And it's a big risk coming through the middle of the country over our aquifer. There's, as I see it, very little upside. Okay, you're going to move oil either by train or by truck, by pipeline. There's accidents everywhere. It's a big risk to us. Do you think the Democrats can stop it?
Well, I certainly hope so. We're going to need the American people on our side to move aggressively in getting the Congress to say no to this disastrous idea. You made a good point, Ed, is that this oil, a significant part of this oil, is going to be exported to Asia. In fact, there are at least 3 separate studies, including one at Cornell, which suggests that because of the infrastructure, refinery infrastructure, domestic prices will actually go up. So here we are doing something which will exacerbate climate change, will create a minimal amount of jobs, will enrich the companies that own the oil fields and who do the refinery, do the refining, and at the same time raise gas prices in the United States. This does not make a lot of sense to me.
All right. So we've seen the positions on both sides of the debate. What we saw from the Canadian ambassador is that the arguments broke down like this. No matter what, we need oil, and Canada is going to be exporting oil into the United States. And also it was argued that this would actually be a big jobs creator for the United States as well. People in the U.S. are reliant are going to be reliant on these jobs and it'll be good for the U.S. economy. Well, something that the Canadian ambassador got questioned about at the end was that after 2 years, it's only going to create about 50 permanent jobs. So the argument that it's going to be a good long-term boost to our economy and sense of jobs doesn't seem to hold water. That was something that was pointed out again by Senator Sanders as well. One conflict that we've seen, though, is that the people who were on, the Canadian ambassador said that the scientists are in support of the bill. That the science is saying that the Keystone Pipeline would be good for the United States, it would be good for the environment, and overall should be passed in order for the benefit of the United States. Senator Sanders went the complete opposite direction, saying that the science is against the pipeline, saying that that there is a danger, an inherent danger to building the pipeline itself. So with that controversy, we see why it's been such a difficult issue for President Obama. Something you saw, Obama refused to take a stance on this for a long time. Whenever he was asked about it publicly, he said that it was among the energy policies that he was considering with Congress. And because people are all over the place on this issue, it makes it really hard to get down to the root of this issue on whether or not it's going to be good, a net positive for the United States or a net negative. So because of that, we're going to go deeper into this debate today. So we're going to break up into 5 groups. I thought there could be 2 groups on this side, 1 group in the middle, and 2 groups here. And you're going to look at, each of you are going to look at what different organizations are saying about the pipeline. We're going to look through what the EPA is saying, the Environmental Protection Agency. We're going to see what the American Petroleum Institute is saying. There's also a group of economic advisors who are going to look at the overall economic impact of the pipeline. Obama's own State Department, they're going to see what the data says or what the arguments are from Obama's State Department on whether or not we should pass the pipeline or not. And finally, we're going to look, there is a coalition of Nebraska farmers which have taken a very clear stance on the pipeline itself. So if we want to break apart into our groups, I'll get the data, or I'll get the information passed out to you. We'll have a little over 10 minutes to look everything over. So here's what your responsibility will be in your groups. These are the questions to consider. 1, what did you read about here? What stance did the organization you read about take on Keystone? And then what is your group's position on the pipeline and why? And was it influenced from what you read, from the videos we watched? I want to know. In fact, it's going to be your decision on whether or not Obama vetoes this bill again at the end of class today. So your opinion does matter. All right. We want to get into our groups here. Okay. And also, if I can get these papers back at the end of class, that would be great.
1,500 gallons. Very taxed plus that. There's so much more. If they added that, then we need to bring 2,000 gallons a day. And the reason they can't extend is that from this over here, because this is already tax capacity, so much tax.
So we should read out loud. A little bit. We should. Expectation that in your state will have some important clarify Keystone is now the extra pipeline issue
So this is for us 4?
Yeah. Yeah.
And get a copies of that depends on their
I think you're all. I know.
go less sugar on 65% because express support for the plan. And it's really 50% Democrats. As all sides read up in a battle that began 5 years ago in the White House.
These dates for those questions, we haven't made September 20.
Nebraska transportation. Here's the link. So we're gonna have to do this.
We write on. When we were in that, I had to read it. But yeah, thank you. Appreciate
That leaves President Obama on a good case. Equally difficult decision to defend, particularly with labor unions that support the pipeline. Support it, and I think there's proposed the project Republicans have made key to their jobs and career changes. White House chief of staff it's not in a rush to make a decision. We have one department with a study, he says, on NBC. And now we have other expert, now we have other expert agencies involved with the study. The EPA and many other government originally doesn't make their determinations. Secretary of State
no, different. You all did, but then other groups got different aspects. So, it's different sizes, we have 5 different groups. Your group before got the same, but then the other groups got different.
Was it Hillary Secretary of State? Who was she? We're going to read the whole thing. So it's good review about the questions. And in that case, we wrote the state's after reading this, do you think that they are for or against it? Like, oh, did you already read it? Your group, so what do you think? Do you think pipelines should be So this is the article. This is the article. This is your So downplay to make less I don't believe that. So downplay made less ordinance Keystone Pipelines affect climate change. So the Democrats are arguing well, now this article is saying Research Center poll last September. You guys finish reading. Found that 65% of Americans express support for the pipeline. 51% of Democrats survived problems. As all sides read up for that, last 5 years ago when the White House was investigating the oil pipeline to a Nebraska transfer station. Here's a look at where this stands. So this was all introduction. Now we're looking at the Obama White House. The long-awaited park report found that the pipeline, the fourth Keystone section, is having a significant effect on greenhouse gas emissions. Its assessment goes something like this. If Keystone XL doesn't get built, the oil extracted from Canada's sources will still be transported. Have the same
Probably that. I also think about it. So it kind of, it touched on how like the environmentalists say that like research is flawed, yet it has a lot of for like what I mean like that.
Oh my gosh.
Do they have evidence that says things like
Conversation is good, but if we could just bring the decibel level down just a little bit.
to look at this determinations.
I mean, it has, like, for every stance that it takes, it has, like, something to say. I'm actually struck by the White House and
So, what's the argument?
If it's going to hurt the environment so much, I'm not doing it. Trucks are more likely to if you actually want to stop fixing rail trains.
Honestly, the actual numbers are walking down, like, the projection. I mean, we have
Alright, how are we all doing? Alright, I'm gonna wrap it up in a couple more minutes, and then, if there's another piece of paper, I have to class, but I appreciate you guys. All your groups are gonna present, just talk about what we read about here in a couple of minutes.
I feel like this whole thing is just kind of like bringing like guys making more problems for yourself because we could just switch down through the things that we don't. If we could do that with all the people that are trying to sell oil and we don't have oil anymore, and that's really
What effect it will have on the numbers of on the big government incentives from conservatively energy producing states whether it was
another thing is there's not, we wouldn't be able to stop people, like, honestly, that's the thing.
Yeah, we're not.
We already have oil coming in, and then we can just use that, and we can slowly use it.
Okay, about 30 more seconds. Now we're going to wrap up the conversation.
What is that room?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to get, I don't feel like it's a long process that we even started because we got.
So,
I think people forget. It's like, you're gonna start
All right, we can wrap it up here. Wrap up these conversations. All right, group one. I believe you read what was it about the economic impacts?
Yeah.
All right, tell me about that.
Essentially, one of the things that was like one of the main key points they hit on was the fact that if the pipeline is built in the U.S., they would have to not only go through. They talked about they've been talking about it for 3 years. They have 57 additional special conditions developed for the project by the Pipeline and the Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And at the same time, if the pipeline comes here, with the factories being specialized to essentially like to clean out this oil, they still have to follow the Clean Air Act, and they still can only emit so much emissions per year. Whereas if they talked about how if the U.S. doesn't take the oil, then Canada's planning on shipping it to China.
Okay.
Which one of the big problems there is that China doesn't have the same, like they don't have anything like the Clean Air Act, so they're not going to necessarily limit the amount of emissions they put into the air as opposed to how much the US would. But like,
Yeah, so basically, a lot of the oil that we would get from the pipeline, let me know if my argument, I'm understanding the argument. We wouldn't be able to use all of it because of the standards that we have from the federal government about emissions, like through the Clean Air Act. So a lot of it we would have to export to China, to other countries who don't have these standards. So overall, it would hurt the environment because we would have to ship a lot of this inevitably to other countries. Is that what was being said?
If the pipeline is not built in the US, Canada plans to ship it to China. So this paper is in favor of the pipeline.
Okay, so ignore everything I just said. So what would happen then if the pipeline's not built is then it would be shipped to other countries who don't follow our standards. So the argument is that it would be actually an environmental hazard because then the oil would end up going to China, going to other countries that don't have the standards that we have. So overall, the argument is that it actually hurt the environment if the Keystone Pipeline isn't passed. Okay, yeah. Pretend like I didn't talk earlier about that. Take a stab at it. So, awesome. Does your group have any thoughts on the pipeline itself? That's okay if not. We'll have further conversations later. All right, second. Yeah.
This one was against it, this one was for it. And the one that was for it was for profit, like people will have jobs and make money. The one that was against it was environmental, of course, and
So the environment, the one that was against it on the basis of the environment, was it over oil spills? Was it over that risk? What was the?
Well, it was like multiple reasons, mostly, it's bad for the environment, but also like, tar sand is really expensive and environmentally hazardous just to develop. So even if you did get that, it still costs more money and it's bad for the environment just to develop it too. And the jobs are only temporary, so.
All right, no, that's good to know. And with this, one of the biggest controversies, you touched on the tar sands issue. A lot of oil isn't, tar sands is a relatively new sort of technology to be able to harness tar sands. We weren't able to use those to extract oil for a long time. And the method of extraction from tar sands is actually much more environmentally hazardous than the way we've extracted oil before, which is partially why this debate has gone so back and forth because of the method that the Canadian government and the Canadian oil fields would use to extract the oil from the tar sands. Okay, so the center group, group 3, what did you read about?
Okay, well our article was actually a KPR report, and it didn't really have a stance. It was more of a brief taking both the sides of both issues, environmental and I don't know, just like money in general. It took both sides, so it touched on the Obama's evidence and then what the problems environmentalists have with it, and then it explained what both Democrats and Republicans were thinking. So, I mean, it's kind of a summary of everything we saw in the news.
Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts from your group about that?
We were generally in favor of not implementing the Keystone because it sort of enables, it just adds another way that we can continue to push oil and thinking about the environment in general and moving forward and how we're going to be sustainable and combat global warming in the future. We thought that it might be in the best interest if we try to limit ways that we're importing oil and come up with alternatives.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. All right, so the group over here.
Ours is about Nebraskans and how they don't want it because it's gonna be on their land and they're afraid of it, just like their future for their children. And yeah, that's mostly what it's about.
And were they afraid about the overall environmental impact or because of the aquifer? Did it go into that?
It talked about the aquifer, they're afraid for that too, and for their farmland.
So, so the risk for oil spills? Okay. All right. And any more thoughts about the? All right. Excellent. All right. Last group.
Yeah, our group read about, there was an article, it looks like it was by the Republican Party, but we're not sure which organization published it. And they were in favor of it because they were talking about economic impact. And they said that, they talked about like in the future by 2035, they said that it could create 500,000 additional jobs by the US in 2035. But that's kind of like flawed because they said full development of the oil sands could support that many jobs, but they're talking about the specific pipeline. And then they said that in a poll, 69% of voters voted in favor of the Keystone Pipeline. So they were saying that the American people want it and it would help out the economy, and they said it's safer, so they're all for it.
All right. Excellent. Any additional thoughts on that? All right. So if you can all jump back into Nearpod. So you're going to now take a position on whether or not Obama should veto this legislation. And on this too, it would be great if you went back to Nearpod because I'm also going to ask a few questions about this lesson itself, the use, me using Nearpod, and using lessons like this in the future. So if you could all jump on Nearpod, I would really appreciate your feedback here because this will influence the types of lessons that I do over the next 2 weeks. So if you can get on here and take a vote.
Does it tell you?
Yeah, yeah. No, that what? Yeah, yeah.
So if we don't have the Nearpod page, it's not.
If you still want to vote, you can, like, I don't know if you want to like give me like.
Oh, so we're not like writing anything, we're just like a yes or no?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It just says should President Obama veto this?
Okay. So, allowing a few more seconds to get in our votes here. All right, and all right, 10 more seconds.
I like this. Remember this cookie thing that we used?
Yeah, why don't we use clickers anymore?
All
It's
right.
kind of like this, but on
All right. By one vote, you have voted for Obama to veto this legislation again. Much closer than by only one vote, actually. So Obama's going to veto the legislation. Actually, a complete reversal from hour 2. So now, if you can let me know, I am just curious as to how I structure my lessons in the future. If how often you use devices, your devices, phones, tablets, that sort of thing, in your classes here at Free State. So if you could participate in that vote too, I would appreciate it. Yeah. Well, I assume it is once in a while.
Yeah, who use them for?
Yeah, for school. Yeah, like, do you actually use them as part? All right. All right. I do in classes today. I ask you to use your phones. Okay.
And
All right. Great to know. All right. One more question, and then I will be out of your hair for the entire rest of this weekend. Would you? The question: would you be interested in using Nearpod in class again in the future? Okay, so far looks like overwhelming majority is definitely interested. So next week I have a lesson where you're actually going to be a part of a jury on a murder trial. That was something that I developed last year. It'll be after we have a talk over the judicial branch. So thank you so much for your feedback today. This really helps me out a lot. Thank you for not being too crazy. My advisors, I appreciate it. Learned that the hard way second hour when I had everyone's usernames come up too. A lot of creativity in the usernames they picked from Pod, which I now know not to put on the projector. So yeah, anyway, thank you all so much for today. Have a good weekend. If you can turn in your papers back to me. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sarah, I hope you have a fabulous weekend, even though you hate me. I said, even though you hate me and Heather, I hope you have a fabulous weekend.
Oh, yeah. After this regular, Does anyone need a study guide, by the way, for Monday? Monday's quiz? All right. If not, it show just come up to the extra ones up here. I'm just kidding.
All hour? The first time I stayed today, I think you did that was just there. Starts with you. That was during the summer. I've been stuck with the lane.
Then you should use the back show. Have a good weekend.
Every single time. I know. Every single time.
I know. So that's what. Again,
choices,
mainly pros get
So Skype tomorrow afternoon. You think
that should work. So, as a photographer, we should really try to so really good if we don't have some reserve so if you are.
write this.
So basically, well, don't write anything down because it basically saying, can I just text you as soon as I put you down? Like, are you largely free? Do you have enough flexibility?
Absolutely.
I do it's usually around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Okay. Yeah, that should be fine. Just send me a text and yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Overall, was that?
I love that content. Where does this fit in your?
At the end, I realized I forgot when I had them all walk out. Going over the 3 branches and going over 3 questions on their quiz was the idea of veto power and also the power of the executive branch to implement legislation. One thing that I noticed was that they were getting a sub came in that really I think confused them a little bit on like the active role of the executive branch as they claim that the executive branch has more power than the legislative and kind of claim that executive leaders could do whatever they wanted to in the after immigration. And so I kind of wanted to create something which showed, which covered like the role of the federal government, showing that it's not just the president has authorized the president system, but also how they're still the president provides the legislative funding and also for bills like this as well, which is recommended by the executive leaders. And at the very end, also the checks that the president goes to, so the veto and the legislation. That was overall what I just, we went over the executive this week, it was kind of traction. And Tuesday was Yeah, I'll convert it, I'll convert it to Word document. Alright, I'll get some Word document. Yeah, thank you.
You are so well spoken.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi.
Being here with you today.
Excellent. All right. I have the whole lesson plan built, so if you just want to chill, lesson plan, you know,
Right, perfect.
like,
I'll hang back here, but if you want me to do something, contribute in any way,
yeah,
let me.
absolutely. This is senior government, so, and we're going over the Keystone Pipeline today.